It's been 6 months since the death of George Floyd and the global protest that followed. We've already had the toppled statues and the black squares on social media. Tonight, once again, we focus on race and revolution and ask, will Britain change? Good evening, I'm Gillian Joseph. Over the next hour, we'll discuss whether the UK has made any concrete progress towards eradicating racism. Joining us, criminal barrister Alexandra Wilson, who founded Women in Law and was recently mistaken for a defendant 3 times in the same day in court. Also on the panel, the author of Everyone vs. Racism, Patrick Hutchinson, who went viral after carrying a far-right protester to safety. Chichi Wanuku, founder of Europe's first professional majority black and minority ethnic orchestra, also joins us, along with Lord Simon Woolley, founder of Operation Black Vote and chair of the Race Disparity Unit's Advisory Board until last year. Facing them, a live virtual studio audience from around the country. They'll be sharing their experiences of whether attitudes have changed in the UK and proposing solutions. Well, we've had commitments from the government and major corporations alike. Tonight, we ask whether 2020 will be the year this country changes the way it thinks about race.
Dominic Clayton, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor.
If we're not going to listen, we're going to scream louder and louder, and we're not going to stop until something is done.
People will speak up about it and be like, you know what, that's wrong, what you're doing.
It's not a moment. It's something that's fundamental. People aren't chattel. They are citizens and they have rights.
What I really hope is that people just learn to respect each other, because everyone's going through stuff.
You don't have to look far to hear from families who've lost loved ones to COVID-19.
I didn't think something like this was capable of taking them away.
Interesting experience being stopped by the police. You create an environment where you create animosity.
No, for what? For what? Then why are you touching my blood? It's in it.
Have you experienced racism in the job that you're in?
Of course.
If I don't understand and accept that anger, who am I?
I think it's time we stopped our cringing embarrassment about our history, about our traditions and about our culture.
It has sparked change, but it's really important that it's not just symbolism.
That's right, come on. Love to see change and people be positive and accept who we are and who you want to be.
We want the black community to be one. This is what we're fighting for. We've got the same features like everybody else, it's just our skin colour is different.
Images and voices from the past 6 months. Amongst them, athletes kneeling in support of Black Lives Matter. Well, sport has been at the forefront of this global protest movement. But here in the UK, it's the sector with the most visible problem with diversity, especially at the top. Take football. The Premier League doesn't have a single black owner, chair or chief executive amongst its ranks. And together, the governing bodies for football, rugby, cricket, tennis, golf, athletics and cycling have one black board member between them. Last month, 40 clubs signed up to the Football Association's new diversity code and committed to making sure 10% of their senior coaches are non-white. Here's former England footballer Leanne Sanderson on how her sport has changed.
One thing that really stands out for me is the lack of black players and ethnic minority players in the women's top league. And if you look at, the starting 11s, if you look at the squads, there's definitely lacking somewhere. We have to look at why that is the case. And I think what's happened in the last 6 months, companies, organisations, teams are now thinking, actually, well, hold on a minute here, we're not really given equal opportunity.
What do you think is preventing more players like yourself from taking up management roles and going into that area of football?
You know, I think it's almost support as well, you know, and the encouragement to get involved in those roles. I think, you know, we have all these plans and there's always talk about these 5-year plans, 10-year plans and stuff like that. But I think it should be a no-brainer that, you know, everybody's given an opportunity.
Do you think that anything has changed since the killing of George Floyd?
I'm definitely seeing a lot more people that have woken up during this time, which is fantastic to see. And we must continue the conversation. And for me, you know, I don't think it's good to divide and conquer. I think we must unite, and everybody's trying to hopefully work towards the same goal, and that's all of us being equal. And hopefully one day I'll live in a world where that'll be the case.
Former England international Leanne Sanderson calling for more support for players wanting to make that transition into leadership. And that's a good place to start. The need for more people from diverse backgrounds in decision-making positions, whether it be in sport or in business. First up from the audience is Samantha Wright. And Samantha's the chair of the City of London's Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Network. Samantha, what would you like to say?
The representation of BAME in senior roles is minute. Lower-level employees don't have any similarities or roles to inspire to. All protected characteristics are underrepresented across the higher employment structures. Therefore, salaries for Black and minority staff in a professional capacity is lower at all levels. Ethnicity-reported data reflects this. Equality still needs to be addressed. This hasn't been changed.
Samantha, thank you. Well, highlighting there the imbalance in many businesses, which she rightly says is backed up by the data. 1.5% of the 3.7 million management jobs in the private sector are held by Black leaders. The Confederation of British Industry is now calling on the UK's biggest firms to appoint at least one racially and ethnically diverse board member by the end of 2021. Since October, 6 FTSE 100 and 2 FTSE 250 companies have pledged to do so. Well, let's take this to the panel. And Simon Woolley, are these schemes necessary? Is it necessary to enforce on companies that they have ethnically diverse boards?
Well, we've had a conversation like no other, because this has been a year like no other. In many ways, we've had a double global pandemic, COVID-19, and its devastating impact on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities and the death of George Floyd. And in many ways, it's convulsed many of our nations, and particularly the UK, to look at ourselves and say, you know what, on so many levels, in so many areas, race inequality persists. And as you have highlighted, particularly at that senior level in sport and in business and in politics. Never before in my lifetime have I known so many white people that have actually begun to look through a Black lives lens and said, something is profoundly wrong and we collectively must do something about it. Now, that's a great opportunity. I just sincerely hope that we seize it and it just doesn't become a moment, but becomes a momentum in which we can both transform our society, our businesses, our sporting arenas, but above all, offer hope. Hope that if you have the talent, you can go from A to B to success. Now, it's a start. And it's a conversation like we've never had. I just hope that it continues.
OK, Alexandra, the CBI's race ratio, is that the type of scheme that you think's necessary? Should these things be enforced or should they evolve naturally?
I certainly think that they should be enforced. I think for too long we've been waiting for these changes to happen naturally, organically, and they're just not happening. I mean, I see the same patterns in my area, which is law. At the senior level, only 1.1% of QCs are Black, only 1.1% of judges are Black. That's not good enough. And actually, the organic way of slowly encouraging people to apply is just not working. And that, for me, is because there are institutional barriers in the way. Ultimately, when you have a profession or when you have an industry that all of the senior people, or the majority of the senior people, come from a certain type of background, that is always going to be a barrier to new people entering. And so I think we need to do more about it. And personally, I do think that we need to set targets.
OK, panel, for the moment, thank you. Let's hear now from one company flexing its muscles over diversity in the boardroom. The UK's biggest fund manager, Legal & General Investment Management, recently warned FTSE 100 companies with all-white boards that any failure to diversify leadership teams after 2022 could have implications for future investment. Here's Senior Fund Manager Justin Onwekusu.
What LGIM has said is that they will vote down the chair of the nominee committee, the nomination committee. The nomination committee actually selects the directors onto the board, or they'll vote down the chair of the board if companies have failed to meet that challenge. Studies show that ethnically diverse boards tend to have more inclusive cultures and therefore tend to have stronger financial and investment results.
So one company trying to drive through change at the highest levels there. To the audience now, and I'd like to take just a show of hands from you. How many of you have noticed a change at your place of work? Maybe your company's now setting targets or offering more training. If that's the case, please put your hand up for me. Not many, very many of you. Probably say less than a third of you there saying that there have been any changes in their place of work. Well, let's stay with the audience. We'll take two questions now on possible solutions. First to Asha Prower in West Sussex, who's a construction project manager at Gatwick Airport.
My question is, government legislation mandates that companies with 250 or more employees must publish their gender pay gap data. Do you think that we will see equal visibility and legislation put in place regarding ethnicity pay gap reporting?
Thank you, Asha. And to Michael Barrington-Hibbert, who's Chief Executive of the recruitment company Barrington-Hibbert Associates. We're going to hear from him in a second. We've just got to get Michael up there. But let's go straight to the panel on that question as to whether we will see diversity targets in terms of pay. Chichi, what do you think in terms of the ethnicity pay gap? Does it exist, first of all? Has that been your experience?
Not in my industry, in the classical music industry. Everybody's on we have rules and regulations for every single part of the orchestra that is absolutely equal, regardless of gender or ethnicity. And so that doesn't yet, well, hopefully it never will apply to the classical music industry.
Patrick Hutchinson, if we could just bring you in there. Is this something that you're aware of, that there is a disparity between the pay of black people in employment and their white counterparts?
Yeah, hi. I would say definitely when I was working in the city, in the corporate arena, I used to have discussions regularly with my fellow work colleagues, and we found that on several occasions I was paid less, along with some of my Asian colleagues, less than my white counterparts. So it definitely exists. It's not a fallacy. It's something that definitely exists out there, especially, I would say, in the corporate world.
Let's go back to Michael Barrington-Hibbert now, who's Chief Executive of the recruitment company Barrington-Hibbert Associates. Glad we've got you back there, Michael. Let us know your question.
Good evening. Thank you, Gillian. I know from first-hand experience that black professionals with ethnically sounding names will receive far fewer approaches when it comes to senior level appointments. Blind CVs have been touted as a solution, but I personally feel it doesn't address the underlying systemic issues. Can I ask the panel, particularly Lord Woolley, who has done so much to increase diversity in politics, what they feel the solutions are?
OK, thank you, Lord Woolley. Your name is on that one. What do you think the solutions are? Mentioned there, perhaps not putting names on CVs. That might be a potential route to equality.
Well, 2 points to the former question. Look, When I was chair of the Race Disparity Unit, I convinced the Prime Minister, Theresa May, to undergo the ethnic minority pay gap review, and she agreed. That legislation is on the shelf and it needs to be implemented as a matter of urgency. Once you lay bare the disparities, you can see the work that you need to do. But, you know, in regards to what are the solutions, we have to have a culture change. And the starting point of the culture change is that for every business, for every football team, you want the best. You want to play the best. You want to be the most effective, the most creative. And what we do know is that diversity gives you that creativity, that talent. So, you know, this is not a tick box exercise. This is not political correctness gone mad. Actually, if we want to turbocharge Britain PLC, then we need to ensure all our talent has pathways to reach the success. And I think when you start from that point, how do we be better? How do we be more creative, more effective? Then you roll back and say, okay, this is not just because we want Black people to do this and that. We want our companies to be more dynamic. And I think that would be a greater driver than saying, can you do us a favor? No, do yourself a favor, unleash talent.
Alexandra, you were nodding there. Is that the case that companies actually should do themselves a favour because actually it's going to increase productivity, the more diverse workforce that they have?
Absolutely. I think that for too long, companies haven't seen the value in diversity, and I completely echo what Lord Woolley has said. It's not just about ticking boxes. And I think that once we start to really value and appreciate what a diverse workforce looks like and the benefits that come with that, you know, often there is a business case for having more diversity, particularly in, again, my industry. I know that there are lots of reasons why you might want to have a diverse range of barristers or solicitors. Quite probably one of the most important is that clients expect it. You know, clients are actually expecting to see people that look like them, whether that's in, you know, family or criminal law or even corporate and commercial law. People want to see people that look like them. And actually that in and of itself is a good enough reason for all companies to start looking to diversify their workforce.
OK, thank you, panel. So we've heard about the changes being worked on at boardroom level and some proposed solutions from the audience, mandatory reporting of the ethnicity pay gap and keeping CVs anonymous, for example. But has there been a shift in the way individuals think about racism? Let's go back to the audience and to Janet Walker this time, Chair of Anti-Racist Cumbria. Janet, what are your thoughts?
So for me, it's when we see Black families on adverts and the racist fallout is barely noticeable because it's the norm, we'll start to see a change in culture, in thinking and in attitudes. When no one bats an eyelid, when Black police officers walk the beat, or when the Booker Prize is won by a Black poet and the journalists don't feel the need to include Black in the description of that individual, we will know that there's been a culture change and that it's starting to happen. When we see a boardroom table that is rich in diversity, not just women, but colour, trans, disability, that's when we'll start to know there's been a change.
Janet, thank you for your contribution. Janet referring there to some of the negative responses to a Sainsbury's advert showing a Black family celebrating Christmas. Let's play a short clip.
I just really hope I can see you lot.
Me too. I cannot stop thinking about Mum's roasties.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. What about my gravy?
What about your gravy?
Hey, you, what's going down?
Dad, not the song.
Gravy boat's coming in town. It's not any old chip, just take a sip. It's filled with scrummy and saucy bits.
How does Mum put up with you? Your gravy is pretty good, to be fair, and I just really want to be home for it.
So my gravy is the best.
Dad.
Honey, she says my gravy's the best. Honey.
So a perfectly normal advert featuring a perfectly normal Black family. Nothing to report there, right? Wrong. I'll read just a few of the complaints made on Twitter. Where are the British people? I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. Or even, you may as well rename yourself Blackberries. Panel, Chi-Chi, first of all to you. Were you surprised by some of those responses? There were thousands of responses on social media.
Oh, it's of course. I mean, it's just alarming and distressing to think that, you know, still the visual aspect of anyone and anything goes before even hearing a single word from anybody. It's deeply distressing, and I think the way these things end up being like this is all passed down, you know, from parents through generations. And the reason why my organisation has had the success it has, and why we are free to make these steps forward, is because I simply started from scratch 5 years ago with the Chineke Orchestra. And so we, right from the very beginning, it was Black-led, board, management, people on the stage, the music we play, completely diverse, from dead white men's music to living Black composers. And we've had to jump through various hoops to prove ourselves, but now that we are also demonstrating inclusion and how it works, and we have leading members from some of the top orchestras in our country wanting to be side by side with us in our orchestra. And I just think we just need to have a better, more open and free dialogue between people. I don't think it's somehow shoving having an advertisement with just a Black family is going to wind people up. We know that. I think we need to demonstrate inclusivity across the board from top to bottom in every possible way that we can.
I mean, the advert was one in a series. There were other families that were portrayed as well. But Patrick, one of the tweets described the advert as absolutely sickening. How does that make you feel?
Well, funny enough, I actually posted this same advert on my Instagram page because I was, I was quite upset about the responses that were that I'd seen, and I wanted to get the responses from the people that followed me, and we were all in agreement that it was just an absolute disgrace. I mean, I loved the centre of attention, the Black father, being a Black father myself, and I loved the old school cinematography about the advert, and it beggars belief how people can find that distasteful, and I just wonder, like, where we're going to get to a place where, I don't see any complaints when there's a white family on every single advert, most of the time. You don't see any complaints. Why is that? Because we don't have a problem with things like that. So why is it that when there's a Black family on TV, and you don't see that too often, if you haven't got anything good to say, why not just be quiet, But I just feel it's a disgrace. And it didn't shock me, I'll add, as well.
Yeah, panel nodding in agreement there. And Patrick, there's certainly those in society who aren't in favour, shall we say, of multiculturalism. And something that, we want to bring in play when you attended that Black Lives Matter protest. You hoisted up a certain gentleman to safety. Later turned out that he was a far-right supporter. What did you feel when you learnt that detail?
To be honest, it didn't change anything about what I did, and I would do it again. I would rescue or try to help anybody in need, because I don't see colour. I see a human being first and foremost, and I'm not going to be party to anyone's demise. Just stand there when I know that I'm capable of doing something about it, regardless of what they might think of me.
Patrick, thank you very much. Honest response there. Let's bring in Rachel, a student from Lymington in Hampshire. Rachel, what's your question?
Hello. So with the understanding that change happens one person at a time, do you feel that now is the time for us to become less passive as individuals? And when we do acknowledge our power as individuals to create change, and we take absolute responsibility for that change ourselves, what's the first and most important thing that each of us can do to ensure that there's a future where being British means we're part of a truly equal and fair society, and where that disgraceful backlash doesn't happen as it did towards the Sainsbury's advert?
Rachel, thank you for your question. Rachel there asking, I suppose, what allies can do, what can white people do to help eradicate racism? Alexandra.
I think that there are two things, and I know I was asked for the first thing, but I think there are two things that you can do. I think the first is educate yourself. We all have a responsibility to make sure that we are alive to these issues. To be honest, being silent, not making that effort to learn more about racism and Britain's role in race relations for hundreds of years. To be honest, it's just not excusable anymore. It's so accessible. We have the internet. There are so many good books. There are so many good documentaries. So that's the thing that we can do on an individual level. But I also think that you need to look at it on a community level, and how can white people or even other Black people be the most supportive they can. Call it out when you see it. Don't just pretend you didn't hear it. Don't leave Black people to fight all of the battles. Actually, if you see something that's racist, if you hear something that's racist, if you even suspect it to be, call it out, speak to that person, address it, and that's how things will actually start to change.
Thank you. Let's go to Zen Adai from Nottingham. You want to talk about the role of social media.
Yeah, really just because I think after the issue with George Floyd earlier this year, we noticed a massive rise in activism on social media. And I think that Instagram activism just indirectly trivializes issues of race. So my question to the panel really is, shouldn't we stop applauding our peers for merely reposting an infographic on their story rather than educating themselves to a higher level? Because at this point, aren't we just praising fish for swimming?
OK, thanks, Zen. And Rachel, making points there about individual responsibility and performative activism. Before I bring in the panel, I'd be curious to see how many of those in the audience and on the panel as well in a moment have had conversations about race over the past 6 months. Raise your hands for me if you've had a conversation about race over the last 6 months, uncomfortable or otherwise. Pop your hands up for me. OK, looks like nearly all of you have had a conversation about race, uncomfortable or otherwise. Let's ask the panel now. Who on the panel has had a conversation about race, uncomfortable or otherwise, in the last 6 months, following on from the killing of George Floyd? All 4 hands up there. So we can see that definitely it has been on the agenda. Simon Woolley, if we come to you now, in terms of the questions that we'd heard from the audience, what role has social media played? Has it just been a superficiality, i.e. just the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and people perhaps haven't done anything further than that in terms of activism?
Well, it can be, and it sometimes is. Sometimes it is. But other times it can be a galvanizing force. I mean, I saw Patrick on social media with this unbelievable act of humanity. He picked up a man who hates him, who probably wanted to do him harm. And there he was. He took him under his wing, pulled him over his shoulder and says, I don't care if you hate me, I'm going to protect you. Now, that couldn't have happened if it wasn't for social media. And I think that we need to use the tools to educate ourselves. And the other thing too with social media, when we've seen these young men and women, Black and white, pull down the statues, in my lifetime, again, we've never had such a conversation about our history. Now, some seem to phrase it as a culture war. Others want to say, let's have a discussion. Let's see what these people have contributed to our society, and let's see what they did to humanity. And then we discuss it, and on balance, we say, yes, no, maybe. But never before have we known so much about these individuals that were involved in the enslavement of Africans. And we've put them on a pedestal and left them there for centuries. And now we're saying, do we really want to do that? So social media has its place. But the biggest factor, Gillian, and your panelists will know this too, is activism. As Alexander said, push back, make the plans, tell people it's in everyone's interest to have these discussions, to unleash talent. And for us, to make a better society. I would just say this, that we have an opportunity from the madness, from the awfulness of George Floyd, of COVID, to look at our institution through a lens that we've never been able to do before. And in that moment, we can really fundamentally build back much better. This has given us that opportunity.
Chicha, you put your hand up there. You wanted to come in.
Yes, I did, because we've all been, all of us, of course, we want to take action. Action does speak louder than words. We've all been in lockdown, so my children and my nephews and nieces wouldn't allow me to go out and demonstrate because they said, "Mum, you're too old," and they all went out and protested. But one of the things I did, the action that I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister when he started talking about, oh, let's do another fact-finding commission. I'm sorry, Boris Johnson, but we have so many fact-finding commissions that have already, hundreds of them, and David Lammy has produced them, and we've had the Macpherson report. Now is time to implement. We have all the facts. We know all the facts. Let's just get on with it. Change is not going to happen unless we have the will and the support of legislators and politicians who also need to be held accountable to ensure that change is written into law, and all the accusations of racism are held up against all the perpetrators and anyone who's trying to, we're just going round and round in circles of trying to find excuses not to do anything.
Alexandra, you put your hand up as well.
Yes, I would echo everything that the panel has already said, Lord Willie and Chi-Chi, I completely agree. The thing that I wanted to add about social media is that let's not forget the dark side of social media too. I think that I've certainly been someone who has fallen victim perhaps to racist abuse on social media. And I do think that social media now provides this platform where people can hide behind a screen and say things that in real life, you would be charged and you would, as a criminal barrister speaking, you would potentially be in quite serious trouble for. But when you're behind a screen with a bot account, a fake account without your name, you get away with saying a lot more. And I've certainly experienced that. And I know colleagues and friends have experienced that too. And so I do think there's a dark side of social media. I mean, not only the bot accounts, let's think about some big, fairly famous people that have, Tommy Robinson has really built up a platform on social media. I can't remember her name, thank goodness, but the woman who's very polarising and has been removed from social media multiple times, who's made racist remarks.
I think we know who you mean.
I think you know who I mean. I've just remembered her name, but I don't even want to say it. But I think those sort of people have been given huge platforms, and the social media sites themselves have often acted far too slowly in removing them from their platforms. And I think that that's something that, that's the kind of other side of social media that we should also bring into this discussion.
OK, panel, for the moment, thank you. So, positives and negatives there. Let's pause for a moment and look at the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement now. Well, it began, as we know, in the United States 6 years ago as a response to police brutality. Since then, the slogan has been used in demonstrations across the world, including here in the UK. I'm joined tonight by BLM UK spokesperson, Dr. Adam Elliott Cooper. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. First of all, tell us who and what BLM UK is. The acronym stands for Black Liberation Movement. You were a part of Black Lives Matter. Explain who you are and what you're hoping to achieve.
We're still working under the name Black Lives Matter, but we've had to register as a community benefit society. And so the available name to us was Black Liberation Movements. But we're a network of activists across England who have been doing organising work, doing educational projects, organising rallies and protests for a number of years now to champion Black lives and champion racial equality across this country.
And what exactly would you say your aims and objectives are? Because people have been unclear about who Black Lives Matter is as an organisation. Is it political or is it an aspirational sentiment?
So there are Black Lives Matter organisations all over the country, particularly after the protests of this summer. We've seen Black Lives Matter organisations set up in every single town and city across the country, and people have different interpretations of what Black Lives Matter means to them. But us as in UK BLM, we have a number of different demands which relate to wanting to radically reform the criminal justice system, wanting to challenge climate and environmental catastrophe, wanting to reform our educational system and our welfare system and our employment and our economy. A whole host of issues that go beyond questions of police brutality that brought people to the streets of countries like Britain earlier in this year.
What about criticism that the actual Black Lives Matter movement has been more divisive than anything else, and actually has made race an issue and a problem that many people hadn't seen before?
I think it's really interesting that you say that, because in the protests of this summer, we saw not only Black Lives Matter protests in big towns and cities that have had long histories of anti-racist struggle, but we saw Black Lives Matter mobilisations in tiny towns and villages that have never seen such kinds of protest. Even in the Shetland Islands or the Isle of Wight, we saw these types of things. And I think it's difficult for anyone who's invested in anti-racism to not be moved by these kinds of protests. And so I think that for some people who might have been slightly blissfully unaware of the kinds of injustices that exist in this country, they may have thought that Black Lives Matter protests bringing these issues into sharp relief were actually bringing about the racial tensions in the first place. But that isn't the case. They're simply highlighting and illustrating an already existing issue, because we're not going to be able to deal with it unless we're all aware of it and can all work together to try to make the changes that this country so desperately needs.
Thank you very much for your contribution there, Dr. Adam Elliott-Cooper, the spokesperson for BLM UK, and what success looks like for his organisation and their aims and objectives. Well, let's see what the audience think now. Do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement has helped or hindered the fight for equality? A show of hands, please. So how are we looking there? Quite a lot of you have raised your hands there. OK, probably about 90%. Thank you very much, audience. Well, let's take a look at the area of criminal justice now. After George Floyd was killed back in May, one of the most senior black female officers in the country described to Sky News the unique pain of watching the moments leading up to his death. This week, we went back to Detective Chief Inspector Karen Geddes and asked whether there have been any concrete changes in British policing since then.
We're still underrepresented within policing around recruitment. There's still a disproportionality around stop and search. That's not going to go away in 6 months, and we have to be realistic around that. So there might not have been any concrete changes that I can put my hat on and say recruitment has gone up, stop and search statistics have changed. But what we have are plans now in place, both locally and nationally, and an appetite from national police chief leaders as well to do something concrete that has longevity and legacy linked to the murder of George Floyd.
Detective Chief Inspector Karen Geddes from West Midlands Police there saying that things won't happen overnight, but pointing to a change in attitudes from police chiefs. Alexandra, your experience as a junior criminal barrister is very relevant here. You were mistaken, as we've said, for a suspect 3 times when attending court in one single day. How do you think bias plays into how black people are treated in the criminal justice system? Never mind the lawyers.
I think bias has a huge role. I think black people are over-criminalised throughout the system. I think that they are over-criminalised, as was already touched on by the officer that just spoke, from stop and search on the street level. You know, black people are 38 per 1,000 black people are stopped and searched compared to just 4 per 1,000 white people. So that's over 9 times as often if you're black. Black people are more likely to be arrested. They're more than 3 times as likely to be arrested than their white counterparts. When you get to the magistrates' court, which is where I do a lot of my work, of course we see a disproportionate number of black people, and it's the same in the Crown Court where I do work. Black people are more likely to be given a custodial sentence for the same offences. They're more likely to be sent to prison. they're more likely to receive longer sentences. And then it's hardly surprising that we look at prisons and Black people are overrepresented in prisons. They make up 12%, around 12% of the prison population. That's Black people, not BAME, Black people. And Black people only make up about 3 or 4% of our population. So they're hugely overrepresented in prisons too. So there is a huge bias throughout our system where Black people are constantly over-criminalised. I was doing another talk earlier today and I flagged that the Metropolitan Police have a gang matrix, a database where they are supposed to identify gang members. 78% of people on the gang matrix are Black. 78% are Black. And Amnesty International have done multiple reports on this gang matrix and said that what these officers are actually doing when they're identifying potential gang members is using cultural indicators that are often associated with the Black community. And in my experience, that's what's happening throughout the criminal justice system.
Patrick, tell us about your experiences, because you've been stopped in by police. I think it's the figure, it's astounding, 30 times in 1 week.
Yes, when I was a young man in my 20s, I was stopped, almost about 30 times. And what happened was I was stopped twice in a day. I'd had a nice new car, a Renault 5 GT Turbo. I was really proud of it. And I got stopped a couple of times. And the third stoppage, I lost my rag and I, had to go at the officer. And he laughed at me and said, "I'm going to show you what being stopped is really like." And I had no idea what he was talking about at the time. And then it dawned on me, an hour later I got stopped. And then half an hour after that, I got stopped again. It dawned on me that he had radioed in my registration number and told all his fellow officers, throughout that week, make sure you stop this man. And I got stopped about 30 times in 1 week.
This is 30 years ago, but still a phenomenal number of times to be stopped by the police in 1 week. Well, a member of tonight's audience works on the front line for the Metropolitan Police, Ali Hassan. Ali, how do you evaluate the relationship between the police and the Black community?
First of all, thank you for having me, Gillian. I see this every single day, and it's difficult. It's the sentiment at the moment. People do want to see change. I'm one of those people who joined the police to be part of the solution. In my day-to-day policing, of course, people want to see people like myself from the Somali community, from the Black community who are frontline officers joining the police. And, there's wonderful teams behind the scenes that are doing this recruitment level and are getting these officers in. The way I find the sentiment at the moment is that, yes, there's a major distrust, and I think it's generational distrust. But again, it takes people like myself who joined the police for this exact reason, to build bridges and speak to young boys on the streets. And this is what I do every single day. Sometimes I just spend a lot of time just discussing what their views are about the police, and sometimes we meet in the middle, sometimes we don't. But again, if I don't do it, then who else would do it?
Ali, thank you very much. Let's put that to Simon. Ali there talking about the generational mistrust. How do we break that cycle in terms of the relationship with the police?
Well, I think we've got to have honest conversations. I think Alexandra highlighted this prejudice that they see a young Black man and they see a criminal. They don't see a lawyer, a barrister, or a scientist. They see a potential criminal. And of course, the other big conversation we need is around drugs policy. When we see who takes drugs, actually, many people take drugs, predominantly white people, and yet 70% of stop and searches for Black people is drugs related. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you keep stopping people for drugs, then that it's going to be inevitable that you'll find some with drugs. And then you say that you have a drug spot area. So first of all, it's an honest conversation. Two, I would say that certain drugs that they're stopping people for marijuana, we need to say to ourselves, well, a lot of people are taking this. First of all, stop having this focus just towards Black people. But two, secondly, let's have an honest conversation about drugs and say, is this a priority or should we be focusing on this? That way that we use police resources, as Ali said, to move in the right direction. Look, I'm also part of recruiting Black and Asian and minority ethnic officers with Police Now, but I want policing with consent. I want a representative police force, and I want all police officers to stop this racial profiling of many, many innocent Black people.
Lord Willie, thank you very much for that contribution. Let's move on now to the most up-to-date assessment of race and inequality in the UK, published early this month by the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights. It found that 64% of Black people in the UK do not believe their health is as equally protected by the NHS compared to white people. And 76% don't think their human rights are equally protected. Well, senior Labour MP Harriet Harman chairs that committee. Here's her take on what needs to happen now.
Everybody believes that society works better, as well as it being right for individuals, that people are on an equal footing and there's no discrimination. So everybody agrees that, and yet nothing changes. And this is just because institutions and societies are slow to change unless those in power who are in privileged positions, all of them, turn their face against the status quo and are no longer condoning and really just accepting unfairness.
Harriet Harman MP, who's chair of the Joint Committee on Human Rights. Well, staying with political action, we have a question from our audience from Sophia Osman, who's a student at Lillian Baylis Technology School in Kennington, South London. Welcome to you. What's your question?
Hi, I have a question from the attendants from my school, and I feel like it's very important to recognise what the youth have to say, because they recognise things that other people will see as oblivious. And their question was, how come the government haven't taken any real action to support change in regards to racial equality?
Thank you very much for that question. Why has there been no real action there? I think I can summarise that point. We know that the official government report from the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities will be published early next year. But Simon Woolley, you've worked within government to address racism, that position you had until last year. What needs to happen to make sure we don't have another series of recommendations which are never implemented?
Well, we need action now. I think Chi said that. There's been a number of race equality reviews, and part of them, David Lammy review, the Ruby McGregor review for ethnic minority pay gap reporting. Let's implement them now. Let's act now. People don't need to be surveyed anymore. Look, central to this is political will. And if you have those in very, very powerful places that are sometimes in denial of the depth and scale of this, we have a problem. I think even worse than that what I'm seeing in some areas of politics within central government, there are some that are pitting the efforts of anti-racism as being anti-white and anti-working class boys. Nothing could be further from the truth, and to pit one against the other in that fashion, to me, is deplorable. Look, we have an opportunity to move the dial, but it needs political will from the top, from the centre, and right away across the piece. And everybody wins, by the way.
Chi nodding there. Is there the political will in your estimation?
I'm not seeing it, I'm afraid. And of course, you know, there's this incredible sense of people fearing to give up power because it's connected to giving up wealth or something. But we all know that if power and wealth is shared, it's a perceived fear, because if we all know if it's shared more equally, then everyone benefits. You know, and unless we have a proper change of attitude at every level in society and consistent re-education of everyone, including those in power, increased representation of minorities in positions of power and influence, otherwise, it's just going to remain a mythical ideal. The equal opportunities initiatives of the woke, white, liberal 1980s have failed. It's time we moved to proportional, positive discrimination. Decolonising the curriculum is step number one. And when people constantly, it's one of the things I said in my letter to the Prime Minister, the first point I made was about decolonising the curriculum. And people keep saying to me, Chichi, why do you want to change history? I don't want to change history. I think we all deserve to know the truth of history. Let's all get more educated, and I think we'll all have a much fairer and better understanding of each other.
Patrick, is that an area that you think needs addressing? You've taken a role in setting up an organisation looking at education of young black people. Is that an area that needs addressing, that everybody is taught our entire history, the entirety of history as a starting point? Chichi mentioning there decolonising the curriculum.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree with Chichi. I feel like I don't even think it should be black history. We should be part of history. So when they're teaching history, our history is included within that. We shouldn't have any separate lessons for black history per se. We just need to be part of the main curriculum, and that's it.
OK, let's go back to the audience now. Denise Richards, you're a campaigner. You've contributed to the government's equality strategy. You did that 10 years ago. How much do you think has changed since then? And what can we learn this time around?
Well, on paper, the Equalities Act looked impressive, but it's been the implementation of it within their own policy framework that's resulted in the continual failure of Black Britons, because we're literally under a government that has not been able to respond adequately to our problems with meaningful or enforceable solutions. And it was actually designed by people who actually don't even look like me. So the gravitational move required to implement change has been so slow. And as a result, the struggle in all the key areas remain as acute as ever: health, education, policing, and the fair distribution of opportunity generally. Gillian's solution? Well, recognizing the impact of caucasity or white privilege would be a great place for white society to begin in accepting that, sadly, that this is still our reality 10 years on.
So a downbeat assessment from Denise Richards there about what's changed since the government launched its equality strategy 10 years ago. So how do we change that? Let's focus on solutions now. We've heard so far what's been done in sport and in business, and I'm going to ask each member of the panel for two concrete things which they believe must feature in that government report on racial disparity, which is due to be published early next year. I'll give you each around 40 seconds. We're timing you. To you, first of all, Alexandra.
Thank you for not giving me 40 seconds. In terms of solutions and what I'd like to see, I think that we do need to have more targets. I think that we need to set targets, and there needs to be consequences if targets aren't met. I think that's the first thing that's super important. And then I think the second thing is the curriculum. I echo what Chi-Chi's already said. I didn't even know much about my own history until I got to university and actively looked into it. And I think that we have a right to know Black British people are British people. And so Black British history should be part of the curriculum.
Patrick.
I think I would like to see some sort of an Ofsted for corporations where, you know, they have to prove what they've done for inclusion and diversity and be held accountable and named and shamed if they haven't shown improvements in those areas. And also, you know, running back to the criminal justice system, I would really like to see the marijuana issue revisited, because the criminalisation of Black men is gone on for too long. And it's okay if you're drunk, inebriated, you know, urinating on yourself and shouting profanities to passers-by because of drinking alcohol. That's okay. But people that, partake in marijuana are criminalised and go to prison. So I don't know, that's unfair as far as I'm concerned.
Chichi, your two solutions, please.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, agreeing with Patrick about the Ofsted, and I want to call it Bofsted, and I think we know what the B stands for, capital B. So hugely increased representation of minorities in minority communities on all employment panels, police accountability panels, race equality committees and educational development forums. We're no longer prepared to listen to or accept recommendations of majority white decision-making processes. And then I'd like to move on to saying that we need to reimburse all African Caribbean employees and retired workers the tax contributions that they've made of their working lives that were paid in compensation to families of dispossessed slave-owning families.
That's a very controversial one there, Chi-Chi, but one that has been mentioned before. Lord Simon Woolley, your two solutions, please.
First of all, the 12 recent race equality reviews implement the recommendations. They're on the shelf, implement them, deliver them. Secondly, COVID-19 has laid bare many structural inequalities in education, in health, in housing, in criminal justice. The government could put together a COVID-19 race equality strategy and cover those broad central issues. If they had that, they'd have a plan.
Short and sweet. Thank you, panel. Before we wrap up, a final show of hands from the audience. How many of you believe that the suggested solutions that you've heard tonight could really effect change? Lots of hands going up. Anybody still undecided? How many do we think now? How many do we think have hands up now? 95% of you. Thank you very much. Well, that's it for tonight. Thanks to all in our virtual audience for your questions and your thoughts. Thanks too to our panellists, Alexandra Wilson, Patrick Hutchinson, Chi-Chi Nwanuku and Lord Simon Woolley. Over the past hour, we've heard about the strategies already being put into place to help eradicate racism, particularly in sport and in business, and those which still need to be implemented. We've talked about the ethnicity pay gap and making CVs anonymous. We've also spoken about making it clearer that diversity is in everyone's interests. We're no longer to accept just recommendations. One of our panellists said we need compensation for slavery. Thank you for watching. Good night.